golden on the outside and chewy on the inside. These bagels are guaranteed to impress anyone who tries them. They're made with simple ingredients, and the recipe is easy to follow. There is no need to go to a store or restaurant to get bagels anymore. You can choose the toppings that your family likes. So let's elevate your breakfast with this salty treat and get started with the recipe. I will be using my KitchenAid to knead the dough for this recipe, but if you don't have an electric mixer, you can knead the dough by hand. It will just take a little bit longer, and I'll still show you a bit on how to do that as well. The first step to making these bagels and to speed up the process really is to activate the yeast. So I added 1¼ cups or 300 milliliters of lukewarm water to the bowl. And to that, I will add the sugar. So I added 3 teaspoons of sugar, and now I'm adding the yeast, about 1 tablespoon. So I do a heaping tablespoon there. I'm going to stir it up, and I'm going to give it a couple minutes just to start to activate. Now, I do this just to speed up the process really, because I don't want to have to wait all day for my bagels to be ready, and this will really help for the flour or the dough to rise a lot quicker, and that way I can make my bagels in much less time. So once the yeast is activated and you'll see that it becomes frothy in the bowl, then we're going to move on to adding the dry ingredients. So here I'm adding 4 cups of flour or 500 grams. I have made this recipe several times before, and I'm familiar with the texture that I'm looking for. But if you are not as confident with doughs, I do recommend using a scale because you'll get much more accurate measurements. Now I'm adding salt. So this is 1½ teaspoons of salt or 9 grams of salt. I tend to add a little bit more. I like my dough extra salty. Once I have all those ingredients together, I will turn to my KitchenAid, attach the dough hook, and I will be kneading this dough. I have done this by hand as well. You just have to put a bit more elbow grease into it if you're kneading it by hand. So this will take about 8 minutes for my KitchenAid to work through the dough and make it nice and silky and soft. Also, if you want more homemade recipes using simple ingredients, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Here I'm checking on the texture and the feeling of the dough. Before I put the dough back in the bowl in a ball and let it rise or go through the first rising process, I'm going to knead it a bit by hand just to make sure that I'm happy with the texture of it. This is something I always do just to be more confident and sure that the KitchenAid was heavily effective on kneading this dough. So I gave you a quick demonstration there on how to knead the dough. You just want to sort of fold it over and push it down with the palm of your hand. Now that I know this dough is ready, it's silky smooth and soft, and it passes the poking test where it rises back up after it's been poked. I am now going to coat my bowl with avocado oil. So that's an avocado oil spray that I have there. My kids ripped the label off of my spray can, but nevertheless, it still works. And so I just oiled my bowl. I oiled the dough quickly just so it doesn't dry out. And now I'm going to put some saran wrap on top of this bowl. You could also put a wet dish towel. That would work as well. Now I'm ready for my dough to go through the first rising process, and I'm going to put it on my oven just because I know that's the warmer spot in my kitchen. I tend to be baking or cooking or, using it often, so it stays pretty warm there. The next step while this rises is to prepare the water bath ingredients. Water bathing is what gives bagels their chewy texture, and it's what really differentiates them from other breads. So here I added 2 quarts of water, and I'm adding about 1/4 cup of honey. So it's 85 grams if you want to know in measurements. And that will really add an element of sweetness to the bagels, and don't skip that step. It's extremely important, and it is what gives this unique, texture and flavor to bagels. So I prep that while my dough is rising just so I can be ready for the next step, and I don't have to do that afterwards, trying to take advantage of all the time that I'm waiting for this dough to rise. Once it's risen nicely, you want to punch it down and get rid of all those air bubbles. So I gave it a nice punch there. And as I take it out of the bowl and start to work with it, I'll also make sure to get rid of all the air pockets that are inside and to sort of flatten out the dough. So this recipe makes 8 bagels. The bagels, once I've shaped them, they will stick to the parchment paper. So I sprayed it with the avocado oil again. And I just made sure that it was over every surface. I just spread it out kind of with my fingertips there. So now I'm going to get my dough scraper to separate the dough into 8 sections. If you really want uniform bagels, I recommend using a scale and weighing these out to make sure that they are exactly the same size. But I don't mind having my bagels being slightly different in size. It's not a big deal to me. That way, if one of my kids wants a bagel and they're not quite as hungry, they'll take the smaller bagel. And I think it just works out better this way. I'm going to give you several examples on how to shape these dough balls from different angles too, just so you can become more familiar with it and comfortable, because I know that this can be the most intimidating part of the bagel making process, making sure that you have well structured bagels and there's not like a seam that comes undone, or they don't look all wonky. So here are my pieces of dough. And what I do initially is I'm going to sort of take all the dough from the sides and pinch it underneath on the bottom and form a ball on top. I sort of push it through between my index finger and thumb. Then I'm going to put all the ball down on the surface of the counter, and I'm going to put my fingers down and roll it while it's slightly moving on the palm of my hand. It will stick to the counter a bit, and this will tighten the ball. The next step is to poke that infamous hole that bagels have. So I'm just using my thumbs and I'm going to poke through, and then I'm slowly going to stretch that hole out, because as the bagels rise or go through their second rising process, the hole will become smaller and smaller. Do this slowly. Don't rush it, because you want to make sure that the perimeter of the bagel, or the whole outside area, is somewhat even. You don't want one skinny section and then one fat section. You want it to all be a bit more uniform. So I do this now 7 or 6 more times, since I already had a couple bagels made. And as you work the dough, you'll become more familiar with it. It'll spring back less. So the more that it sits there, the less likely it is to sort of shrink back up and become more difficult to work with. And make sure you leave enough room for yourself on the parchment paper. Spread them out as need be. And if you need to use 2 cookie sheets to fit everything, do that. You don't want the bagels to be sort of overflowing and all touching. I make do with 1 sheet, but I have used 2 in the past as well. Once you're done shaping all your bagels, you want to put a towel on top of it so that they do not dry out. And at this point, while they're going through the second rising stage, you should boil your water, so that by the time the water comes to a boil, hopefully your bagels have risen. So here you see that they sort of plumped up a bit and they're larger in size. So now we are going to place them in the water bath. So I'm using a slotted spoon here, and I'm going to pick it up with my hand, and they're not sticking to the parchment paper because I put down that avocado oil. I will then place it on my slotted spoon, and I will gently put it in the water bath. Try not to crowd your bowl or your pot. I somewhat crowded it here. I mean, I think 3 fit, but I couldn't fit another one, that's for sure. I think it was the perfect amount. After 1 minute, so you want to set a timer for 1 minute, and then you flip the bagels. Make sure to do this gently as well, but they won't be sticking to each other. Once they touch the water, they're not likely to stick, so you don't have to worry about that, luckily. I keep rearranging my bagels on this parchment paper just to make sure that I can fit them. Maybe it would have been easier to take a second cookie sheet and, use that instead, but nevertheless, it worked. After the bagels have finished cooking for 1 minute on each side, you want to transfer them back to the parchment paper and let them sort of cool down and rest there. And then you'll move on with the next batch. As a kid, my family used to get bagels about once a month on the weekend, and it was that sort of special treat that we would all enjoy together. My parents would pick up some cream cheese and some smoked salmon, and it would make for a great brunch meal that my family would enjoy. One of the, I wouldn't say downfalls, but one of the shortcomings of living in more of a rural area is I don't have access to bagels made from a wood burning oven, or, those lovely bagels that you find more in novelty stores or restaurants. And so, one thing that I wanted to do to make sure that, we could enjoy this nice treat as well was to learn to bake bagels at home. This tends to be a treat that I make about once a month, just like when I grew up. And it's something that my kids look forward to, and my husband really enjoys them. As my three kids that are, eating food, not including the baby, but as they're getting bigger, my husband's saying that I should be making two batches of these bagels because they just go so quickly in our household. I'm finishing up with the water bathing process, so this will be the last round of bagels that I put in. And you saw me quickly beat an egg there. I'm just trying to prepare all the ingredients for the last and arguably the most fun step of the bagel making process, which is putting the egg wash and the toppings on. I also wanted to make sure that I was going to have these bagels ready for lunchtime. So I was really trying to speed up the process here and make sure that everything would be ready so that we could all enjoy these together. After these bagels cooked in the water, they really did grow. They became a lot fluffier, a lot bigger than what they looked like previously. So I'll give you a quick look here once I take the water off the burner. They plumped up nicely. They really rose well, and they're honestly looking pretty good in their shape. Sometimes I have a wonky bagel here and there, and that's okay. It still tastes delicious. So the next step is to put a good coating of egg wash on each bagel, and you don't want to skip this step or rush this step. I'll speed it up a bit for you here because, you saw me do the first one and we're pretty familiar with what an egg wash is. Just to give you a quick, closer look at it, you want to also make sure to coat the outside, but also the middle of the bagel. That's what will give it its nice golden brown finish. And once we're done with the egg wash is when we choose the toppings. Now, you can top your bagels however you like. I like to have everything but the bagel spice put on my bagels, and my kids like sesame seeds. So I've made other types of bagels too, but this tends to be, the classics that we go back to. And I also find they're more versatile toppings. You could use them for a breakfast sandwich or, something for lunch, or with cream cheese and smoked salmon. They're really, toppings that are more universal and versatile. I'm putting sesame seeds on 5 of the bagels since my kids like sesame seeds more, and I enjoy sesame seeds too. But sometimes they just find the other one that has more spice to it not as pleasant. So I just want to make sure there's enough bagels for my kids. There's also other variations of bagels that you can make where you incorporate things within the dough. And I will probably make a recipe on, a different type of bagel in the future. But for now, we just did more classic style bagels. So once these are ready, we are going to put them into the oven at 400 degrees. Now, I do recommend to check on your bagels after about 20 minutes because depending on, how hot your oven runs or where the oven rack is in your oven, they may cook quicker. So this is what the bagels should look like when they're done. They're nice golden brown. These took about 25 minutes. They smell delicious. They've cooled now, so they're ready for me to cut them open, and everyone's waiting for, me to serve them lunch so that we can all eat our bagels together. So the true test is to look at what the bagel is like inside and that big reveal moment. Opening it up, it looks, like a bagel should look. It looks nice and chewy, but also fluffy, and it looks airy. It doesn't look dense at all. And they're nice and soft and light. So I'll give it a quick taste test, put a little bit of cream cheese on the bagel, and they are delicious. They're perfect. They taste like a bagel should. They're nice and fresh. And we made them from scratch at home with ingredients that we're familiar with. So I hope you give this recipe a try because it is definitely a winner in our household. And enjoy.